Morning, everybody. I'm honored here to be part of this conference. A big shout out to Rick and his team, the hospitality, the professionalism. The whole venue has been top notch, so thank you. I'm the last speaker of the day, so hopefully you'll gain some information of what we do. My name is Joe McCabe. I'm president and CEO of Auto Forecast Solutions. Give you a little background on who we are and what we do. We forecast the production of every single vehicle built worldwide for the next 8 years. Who builds it, where, when, how many? That data is updated every single month for our customers. We give them weekly updates to help them understand manufacturing changes, what's coming, so you don't have to wait every 30 days to worry about how your program codes are changing or timing or new vehicles are being introduced or taken out of the plant. We also have a series of business planning solutions on top of that. One allows you to put your part numbers against it to do a live revenue and volume planning. One of them lets you do your competitive analysis to put yourself and your competition in there. And the other one is we're the only data provider that lets you actually use our forecasting tool. So if you want to build your own scenario analysis for your analysis, great. But on top of that is the support. You know, data has been commoditized in the last decade or so. I've been doing this for 25 years. And we find out what's really important in the industry is the so what and the why. We're all getting quotes. Some are always inflated quotes, multiple customers, new players in the industry, and you need some guidance in that industry. And that's what my team does. We all have that same 25 years experience. So I'm hoping today I'm going to give you some of that so what and why as we go through the slides. Disclaimer, my slides are eye charts. So if you want a copy of it, shoot me an email. I'm glad to share it with you. On a weekly basis, we've been tracking the semiconductor impact. So since January of 2021, we've been collecting all of the plant information that talks about an announced shutdown due to a semiconductor shortage. We then can use our algorithms to calculate the volume impact of that shortage. And then furthermore, we can say, looking at that product in its portfolio, is that a vehicle that a manufacturer is going to want to regain that volume or give it away? For example, large Detroit 3 are going to want to rebuild their pickup trucks that they didn't get, but they're probably not going to go reprint the Malibus that didn't get printed because the consumers aren't really buying passenger cars. So we have to look at each vehicle and say, what's the impact? And if you're supporting that platform, that program, that specific vehicle, this sort of gives some guidance. So let's do some quick numbers on here. On the left-hand side is the current year. There's 4 different categories. There is the volume that's been hit, but we consider as recoverable volume. That'll be through shift balancing, taking holidays away, things of that nature. Yellow is the more at risk. These are the plants that have been shut down for longer than 14 days. Our experience of last year is if a plant was shut down for 14 days, high odds the volume was going to be lost for the year. The red is our calculated of what we believe is unrecoverable volumes. And the blue, because we're forecasters, is, well, we're not out of the woods yet, so we believe there's still more pain coming. Obviously, North America, unfortunately, in the lead. Europe in second place, 620,000 and 437,000, respectively, of lost volume. On the right-hand side is the year-to-date conversation, and unfortunately, North America and Europe are vying for first place in a very unfortunate race. But let's talk about some numbers here. Right as we speak, about 14 million units have been impacted by the chip shortage alone. Nearly 8 million of that we are considering lost volume. Now, because we're forecasters and we're not out of the woods yet, we're approaching 15 million of total impacted volume on the chip issue. Announced plant volume impact, right now, about 3.5 million this year, lost about 1.5 million, and there's about 437 plants on a global basis that are being hit by chips as we speak. And then Monday, there'll be a news story. So let's set the stage about the outlook, right? So we got to tell a story behind the data. It can't just be a bunch of numbers and you have to figure out on yourself what these numbers mean. So this is the global outlook. We cover every single region of the world, every country that builds a light vehicle. There's about 60 right now that build light vehicles all over the world. And I wanted to use 16 and 17 and 18 as anchor points because since we update the actuals every single month, we have to use history to sort of tell a story as well. So in 2016, the high water mark in North America was 17.79 million units of production. Okay. In that same window, in 2017, Europe was 22.4. China, right now, is 27.72, that same time frame. And the rest of Asia, less China, was a 23.14 high water mark. So that 3-year window is sort of our anchor for our story today. Because the idea is we're in a pandemic, we're in semiconductor shortages, we're in geopolitical pain, there's a litany of issues that are hurdles for us. And a lot of people think of, well, when those hurdles go away, we're going to be back to normal. Well, that's the new norm is going to be different. It's such a cliche these days, but it's going to be completely different as we go forward. So now let's look at that forecast. And as we look at the forecast going out, we see that North America never gets back to that 17.79 mark, right? We look at Europe, never really getting back to that 22 and change. Major markets, rest of Asia, never going to get back to that 23 million. China, that's another beast we're going to talk about in more detail in a second. But the issue here is that we're going to have a mix of product portfolio that's going to completely alter the landscape. When we have this balance of internal combustion engines and electrification and EVs, there's going to be a complete new dynamic about how manufacturing is going to happen. You're going to see more build-to-order strategies. You're going to see the manufacturers saying, why do I need to keep a massive dealership network where I can make more profit per vehicle but less vehicles? You got to keep reminding yourself, all manufacturers have one master, and that is the shareholder. Shareholder value dictates everything at the end of the day. As long as shareholder value is increasing, they're doing their job. Tesla's proven that profitability is not an indication of success. It took them 11 years to become profitable. That was mostly because they were they're selling their credits to Chrysler at the time, but now they're where they are now, and they're a juggernaut. They're multiple times bigger than all the big manufacturers have been doing this for over 100 years. So what we're seeing is new player entrants coming in that's changing the shift. We're also going to see consumer strategies changing, how people get into the vehicles, how they're going to be in the wallets of the people on a monthly basis, the Netflix effect, right? The subscription model, not the transaction model. The whole dynamic's going to change. So when we say the volumes will get to only 17, we don't think that's a bad thing. We think that is the new norm about how production's going to be. Unfortunately for suppliers that are usually volume-driven machines, when you lower volume and they're constantly asked for price reductions, those two things are sort of counterintuitive to each other. So today we're going to walk through all that story and see hopefully what it means to your business. If we look at the major markets for a short-term outlook, again, we do an 8-year outlook, but let's just look through 2023, and we're going to see the green is the pre-pandemic actuals, the yellow is the pandemic and current actuals, and the blue is our forecast. It's on a quarterly basis. And what we're basically seeing is, yes, we all know about the supply chain issues. We all know there is an issue with supply shortages, semiconductors, getting things across the ocean, logistics. I mean, the list goes on and on. I'm preaching to the choir about what the pain points are. But what we're going to see is a flattening out. Right? We're going to see basically, when we look at the outlook, we used to have a lot of seasonality in production, how things were going. But because you can change to potentially a build-to-order strategy, and you don't have to have 90 days of trucks and 60 days of cars on a lot for inventory, and you're willing to wait a week. If I want the blue XLT or the white SLT, maybe I wait a week. I'll pay sticker, I'll get exactly what I want, I go to the dealership, they hand me a coffee, my kid plays in the ball pit, and we have a nice transaction. But then the manufacturer will lock the price. This is what Ford's doing right now, and they're all going to follow suit. Find a way to really get in there, get a better margin per vehicle, but produce less vehicles, but produce in a more level state. So that's what we're calling for going forward, this idea of removing the seasonality out of production and really leveling it off. Obviously, we have inflation to deal with. Obviously, we have economic weakness. We have geopolitical issues. These are all factors going into the conversation. And as I go through these slides, we have some ideas on how to maybe transform the supply chain and the model going forward. One way to look at data is to look at, you have customers now, but who's your customer going to be in the future? So we look at manufacturers that have power. And when we look at power, we look at a brand owner. So think of Volkswagen. Volkswagen owns 12 different brands. So think about this from a brand owner perspective, not just who's vehicle manufacturer, because it takes away the noise of contract manufacturing. It takes the noise away of joint ventures. So the 1 million unit club from a brand owner says these brand owners have buying power and have the ability to negotiate and push their supply base around for better pricing. Okay? And the usual suspects are on the top, Toyota, Volkswagen, Stellantis, et cetera, right? 9, 10, 11 million units per year. But I want you to take interest on the bottom of the list. The bottom of the list, where we're talking about since 2012, the new inductees that are doing over 1 million units a year, BYD, Chery, Geely, Great Wall, SAIC, everyone but Tesla here is an Asian-based manufacturer, all having significant buying power and all wanting a piece of the American pie, all wanting to find a way to find their way into this market. So if they're not your customers now, or you're not working with them now, you have to seriously consider the conversation of they're here to stay, they have buying power, and there should be people you should be talking to, not just your usual suspects. We tell our customers a reactive model is not successful. A proactive one is much better, right? Know what you are now, understand, and look forward. And when you look forward, you got to look forward at those new opportunities of new customers, not just potential new opportunities with the usual suspects that you're working with. From a North America perspective, I want to break it into the 3 different jurisdictions, Canada, US, and Mexico. We're looking at 3 anchor points, 2020 as our last bad, our bottom, 2016 as the top, right? So we're talking about 32% growth from the bottom in 2029 based on 2020. If you look at 2016, though, that high water mark, we actually have a negative compounded annualized growth rate. Again, that's not a problem. But the story we want to tell here is that, US and Mexico are usually on the upside, and Canada has always been in the downside. But they're changing their story in Canada. Canada goes, look, we can't be victim to the Detroit 3, taking volume out, and I'm not slighting them, but GM will come in and say, we did 300,000 Equinox, but we're going to trade you for 30,000 Bright Drops. Now that's a labor issue to hit, right? We saw Oshawa got hit. We saw Oakville get hit. We see this shift of manufacturing, and Canada's always there. Look, we're part of this USMCA equation. We're important here. They're changing their tune. They want to be the center of electrification. So they're going to be a big mineral supplier, a big battery supplier. You're talking about, on a map, Canada's pretty big, but it's 1/10 the population of the United States, and 99% of them are all in one jurisdiction of Ontario, where all their automotive is. So it's a very centralized market. The government's very pro-automotive now, pro-manufacturing. So you're going to see much more stuff coming out of Canada. It's going to be focused on that electrification supply chain, which is going to be critical for all of our conversations as we go forward. Now let's change the view and let's look at North America from a powertrain mix. In 2021, we're going to break into 3 categories: internal combustion engines, hybrids, which is plug-in hybrid, standard hybrid, extended range, and pure battery electric vehicles, BEVs. In 2021, 14% of all vehicles built in North America were electrified. Now we go forward. Now, if you take all the business plans out there and add them up, we're conservative, right? All the business plans added up is 40% more than reality. That's just how it's working. You throw electrification on top of it, no self-respecting EV player is going to give you volumes of less than 150,000 a year. That's the new mark to. It used to be 50, then 25, it keeps on getting bigger and bigger. So we see our tipping point in North America at 2029, where it's a higher mix of BEVs to the hybrids, but now we're over 50% of all vehicles built in North America fully electrified, which is really challenging for suppliers that have to either they're heavily invested in ICs or they have some sort of mix and they have to really evaluate their portfolio going forward. So again, I know these numbers are probably considered high when you look at 52, but if you look at all your plans, I guarantee all the manufacturers are going to put it more like 75, 80% by there. If we look at it by the jurisdictions, let's break it up: US, Canada, Mexico, and there are 3 categories. US is the market leader in this perspective. We have now a big government push. We have a big push to really be this carbon footprint reduced, and you're going to see this massive drop in internal combustion engine, but there's still a significant amount of IC out there that needs to be considered. And remember, that light green still needs an engine, right? It's a hybrid. So it's not just the blues against the greens, it's the light greens and blues against the dark greens here. So you got to look at the perspective on this. In terms of Canada, like I said, if you look at 2021 through 24, like nothing in terms of the EV space, and then they're off to the races. They might be a little later to the game, but they're really invested into it. And Mexico is here to stay, right? Very important part of our economy, the whole USMCA calculation. And when you can have a labor force and you can build a middle class, meaning your labor force that builds the vehicles can actually buy the vehicles. That's a big deal for a jurisdiction. So it's not just about low-cost manufacturing. The quality is up. There's no more conversation about, hey, built in Mexico. It's a really important part, and they're here to stay, and it's a market you got to really pay attention to going forward. All right, so since we're here, I want to highlight a few of the, let's call them Southeast and related areas of investment that's going on. Again, 19. I picked 19 as our anchor point because it's the last year that was pre-pandemic, so it takes away some of the pain. And we look at growth. So we look at Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and the percent growth is pretty good. Alabama's got 20% volume growth. It's production in that window. Georgia, 139%. Congratulations. North Carolina, brand new production. Right? South Carolina, 26, Tennessee, 25%. And then the highlights on the right-hand side, new players, Arrival in Charlotte, Ford with Blue Oval City in Tennessee, right, with more BEVs. Geely Group with obviously the Volvo conversation, building their EX90 and Polestar 3 coming. Hyundai at Elabel, Genesis products, Kia pickup, West Point getting a new EV9. Mazda Toyota conversation with the CX-50 as well as the Toyota Corolla Cross. Oshkosh, new players coming into the light vehicle space. Rivian, as we talked about before me, two thing. VinFast, right, making a significant investment in the area. And Volkswagen. Volkswagen in terms of the Georgia one is, in Tennessee is important here. Now I put an asterisk on the Scout. We don't have a plant for the Scout brand yet, but everything's leading towards Chattanooga making the most sense. So where it's going to be. So we're going to put an asterisk on that right now until they have confirmation of where that's going to be. But a Scout pickup and an SUV coming in that electrification space, the revitalization of older brands. Okay, new players. Again, another eye chart. So here are the short list of players that are looking at a North America footprint. GAC, 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, owned the entire center of the Detroit Auto Show. 2 years later, they were relegated to the concourse, right, out in the front. They're really pushing hard for a product for this market. They had a substantial relationship with Stellantis that's sort of on the rocks in certain areas, but they did have a plan to market a GAC-built vehicle in China as a Dodge vehicle in Mexico. That is sort of on the rocks right this second because the relationship's a little strained, but they're using that partnership relationship to really get their way into North America. Chery was trying to use an importer by the name of Ha. Ha had these brands called Vantis and Tego. They were going to market Chery's. It has since dissolved, but they have not given up. BYD, 2 words, Warren Buffett. Here's his swan song, right? He comes in and says, I believe in this, it's electric, I'm going to come in. BYD made an announcement, we're going all EV just last year. So we think if you look at a player, BYD is real in the top of that list. Geely using an ownership strategy with Volvo and Lotus, and they're staking some Lincoln Co. and Polestar brands. Different strategies, keeping arm's length away, letting them get the job done, but still has a huge Chinese influence. SAIC is everywhere but North America, so it's surrounding, right? And then VinFast, right? This is where the really disruption happens. And I'm not trying to slight VinFast, but you're talking about a manufacturer who's never built an EV in their life. They decided to invest billions of dollars in a jurisdiction, and now they're going to push really, really hard to be a valued product, and they're going to come out with a really substantial product to really hit the market. This is where the new consumer comes in, the emotional buyer. And I joke about it, but if you give a car to a TikToker up there, you might actually get some buyers up there because you got a new type of consumer that doesn't touch the vehicle before they buy it. I've never grown that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-electrification, but they're not targeting my generation. They're targeting my kids' generation. So it's a long, long haul. We know automotive is glacial in speed, and they have to start somewhere. So this is where we really think the growth is going to come. But these new players, when they gain traction, really shows how this market is really disruptive. And obviously the whole list, Foxconn, Lucid, Rivian. Look, I'm not calling this out as fact, but Foxconn is a major supplier to Apple. They're going to be building the Fisker Pear. You put an Apple, you put a Pear, you put those things in a conversation, all of a sudden you say, who's going to build an Apple car? Hey, Foxconn bubbles at the top of our list. So there's certain things we're really paying attention to about new players coming. Okay, China. I don't care if you're North America only, you got to pay attention to China, not just because they're a juggernaut, but how they got there. In 2010, China was the size of North America. At that point, the government said, we are going to be a global leader, and we're going to basically tell all of our manufacturers to get it done. And in 7 short years, almost 28 million units. They had 10 million units of production to their top line. They basically added the US on top of their top line in 7 years, or 2 life cycles in automotive speak, which is unheard of. Now when you take some of the incentives away, the drop, but we have them, they survived really well COVID, they're with the actuals, and we have them capping at 30, and the reason we cap it at 30 and have them sort of just leveling off because they don't want to build just in China, they want to build everywhere else in the world. The problem with the China model is on the right-hand side. 113 different manufacturers in 2029. They all can't survive. But what's even worse is 105 brand owners. So think about 105 Volkswagens in one region all fighting for business. That's an unsustainable market. So what we see China doing is the government saying, look, when you made 25,000, we subsidized you. Well, you can't do it anymore. So the 25s will get in the room, and two 25s will make 50,000, and they'll say, hey, great, now we get a subsidy. So you're going to see the volume stay, but you're going to see the consolidation, attrition of players going out. And the whole China model is an interesting one because if you sort of anchor a conversation with them, you know, I know there's a lot of geopolitical stuff going on here, but anytime we become real protectionism here, it then brings it. The Japanese did in the 80s. Korean manufacturers brought in, you know, the Japanese identified a need for small cars while we had land yachts. The Korean manufacturers identified a 100,000-mile warranty, a lot of product at a good price. Right? So when you say you got to build here, well, it's coming, right? So you're going to see a lot of Chinese influence coming in North America. This is what keeps people up at night on the EV story, right? There's only four problems, right? Range, infrastructure, resource, and cost. Hey, that's not too bad. There's only 4. There's about 2 pages worth of small print underneath those 4 bullets, right? So we can't just magically get rid of those problems. But these are our current problems. The chart shows the issue that happens in this industry. Dark blue and light blue is our forecast. The dark blue is the legacy players like GM and Ford that go into battery electrics. The light blue are the new players like the Teslas and the Rivians. The dark green and light green are the business plans, okay? So the business plans are literally 80% bigger than where we think their forecast is going to be. And then you have the futurists on top in the gray, that we're all going to fly in cars in 7 years. So there's a lot of audiences out there that are telling stories that sometimes are directed to their message, but we try to give more of a reality statement. But let's just pretend the futurists are right. That means at least half the cars still need an internal combustion engine, right? Because this is BEVs. We're missing all the ICs and the hybrids. So when you're talking about 50 million units in the futurist conversation, everyone's plans get hit, which we know is not going to happen. Then you layer on the better story on top of that. It's not an achievable target, but even if it was, half the vehicles still need an internal combustion engine. So we're not telling our supplier base that make pistons to start running to the hills. We're just telling them to reevaluate their product portfolio and use their skill set. You know, I'm a metal bender. Maybe I want to bend metal for a battery tray instead of something that went into the powertrain. So it's about rethinking the portfolio going forward. All right, in terms of battery production, we're looking at the idea that most manufacturers want to get about 300 miles of range in their average vehicle. They'll have a lower battery, a higher battery, but let's average it out. About 300 miles of range per charge, about 480 kilometers on that one. North America and Europe on the high end of that, and we find that Asian manufacturers are more on the low end in terms of the range. Again, this is using our forecast, not the numbers you hear from the manufacturers. But we're basically saying that 70 kilowatt per hours per vehicle is going to be the norm on the vehicles going out through 2029. But we are looking at the fact that we need 4 times the amount of battery capacity now in 9 years, or 7 years, excuse me, than we have right now, right? That is 30 to 50 more gigafactories. So this infrastructure issue is a reality, and we really got to pay attention to the ability to build these vehicles, let alone sell them. Another hurdle is the fact that we haven't decided on what chemistries we want. There's 3 main chemistries, NMC 955, NMC 811, and LFP. LFP is the new one that takes a lot of the cobalt and nickel out of it, but it's for your lower range vehicles. And then the other ones are going to be more your higher range vehicles. And in solid state, yes, we hear the conversation, but it's really not going to hit any volume past 2030. But again, when you have multiple issues here, and you have different ways of looking at the data and which path do I take, disruption sort of slows development sometimes. So we're saying that there's an equal weight of battery chemistries out there that are all vying for certain critical minerals that need to be paid attention to as well. Raw material storage. Global production of lithium in 2021 was 100,000 metric tons across all industries. Fast forward to 2030, we're forecasting the need for 260,000. So 2.6 time multiple on that. Again, our numbers, not the vehicle manufacturers. If you take their numbers, it's probably more like 5 times. Okay, tough to read, but we have to talk about the IRA and Inflation Reduction Act. I made this chart this way as a takeaway so you can read it. They're working through the language right now. There's some Q&As going on this week. But basically the highlights, right? The vehicle's number one's got to be built here, okay? Number one. If it's not built here, everything's off. Number two, if you want any money from the tax, it's got to fall into a critical mineral threshold and a battery component threshold ranked from 40 to 80% and 50 to 100% over a period of time. And it has to be sourced here or a free trade country, with the caveat that nothing can come from a foreign entity of concern. 1% of that mineral battery comes from China, game off, right? This is, I think, the hardest hurdle. You can't say, hey, it made 41%, but 60, the other 59 is coming from China. Sorry, right? And that's going to phase itself in the next 2 years. That's going to be the biggest problem in trying to get these vehicles a tax credit. The other one is the fact that it's capped based on income and capped based on cars. Now, we've already seen it. Car prices and truck prices are going to go up. This is designed to help manufacturers actually make a profit on these cars because they're just going to pass this tax incentive through you. You can now do it at the dealership the way they're structuring it. So these incentives rarely, if ever, all of a sudden magically result in lower car prices. They result in higher car prices. You're going to see a lot of $54,999 cars and a lot of $79,999 trucks out there, all in that threshold, right? So that's what's needed to build this market because, again, these manufacturers still have to make a profit. But now we look at the brands that can or can't play in this new IRA. Now, we can only base it on two criteria. Number one, domestic production. And number two, if we believe at least one trim level of that brand falls within the threshold. There is no conversation here about the mineral or battery yet, but by the end of the year, whoever cracks it's going to market it. Hey, come in for your discount, right? Hey, we're Tesla, we're using Panasonic, and we're going to hit the battery thing. Come buy it, you're going to get a credit. So the list is pretty long. Now in 2023, this is the list that is good. So the list on 23 is a good list, but you have the new players, you have the usual suspects. But then you have the conversation Hyundai's doing right now saying, look, I'm making an investment, more investment in North America, and you're going to punish me, which is unfair. So now the government's going to say, well, maybe we'll give you a reprieve. So when we look at 2025 for the Hyundai brand and 2026 for the Genesis brand, that may get pulled forward a little bit if the government does say, yes, we will accept the fact that you've committed to billions of dollars investment here. But you're going to see a lot of gray area in how this thing plays out. We're still trying to figure out how it benefits inflation. That's a conversation for another day. But this idea that, yes, it's nice and we're incentivizing, but the incentive right this second is non-existent because you don't even know which brand you're allowed to get. Logistically, what's this going to do? It's going to force everyone to start building here as fast as humanly possible. Because not built here means you're off the table, right? It's going to reduce the need for imports because you're going to have more stuff consumed here because then you have USMCA rules on top of that for content. So a lot of moving parts is going to come off of this thing. Now let's just go through some quick slides about the global electrification. This is just electrification. Green are the Chevs, meaning standard hybrids. We don't want to mess with the F for fuel cell. FEV is plug-in hybrids, BEV, and the percentage. Globally, we're talking about over 26% of all vehicles built in 2029 will be full battery electric. That's a significant amount of volume. However, look on the right-hand side. That puts 152 million BEVs on the road. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of infrastructure. So that number of 152 million BEVs on the road, to get to that number, these are going to be really difficult times to pull this off. In North America, everyone thinks North America's behind. No, 1 out of every 3 vehicles in 2029, we're forecast to be pure battery electric. 28 million vehicles on the road that requires infrastructure, right? And then we see a tipping point. We don't see a lot of plug-in because once you invest in a battery electric or plug-in, the battery electric is just a little more than the plug-in, honestly, right? It's just bigger battery and removing the engine. So you're going to see a lot of people go from hybrids to battery electrics with taking the plug-ins out of the conversation. In Europe, big push, big governmental, big incentives, a different machine there. Basically no plug-ins, very little plug-ins, a much bigger BEV to standard hybrid mix because of regulations and rules for it, but 42 million cars on the road. China, it drops off, but the law of large numbers says 33% of a big number is still a big number, right? So not nearly 10 million BEVs built in China in 2029, 72 million. If you're looking for investment strategy, I suggest 50-foot and 100-foot orange extension cords that are just going to be flying out the windows of all the high-rises in China to plug all these things in. So, take my note now and start buying, go to Home Depot and start buying them up because I don't know where they're going to plug these things in. Okay, so let's look at Ford on a global basis. Let's focus on some of our customers here. 34%, right? That's a huge mix. But Ford's got a nice little strategy, right? They're taking they're taking multiple paths. They're not an all-in on electrification. They just brought out a new Mustang, right? That's full IC. At the same time, they're converting F-Series to Lightning. So they're really trying to take a sort of a shotgun blast approach, which is pretty cool. GM, the only reason GM's number is lower is because they really don't have any European manufacturing anymore. They got out of that relationship, so this is a China, North America story to have the conversation. But again, 1 out of every 5. Stellantis, with the whole PSA relationship, meteoric, right? 1 out of every 3 or so vehicles are going to build in 2029, full battery electric. Volkswagen, had to sort of, get out of their own way about issues they had in the past, and they're all in. Huge mix of electrification, full electrification in their electrified strategy. Hyundai, right? Again, now the numbers don't look, you're talking about a global brand, you're talking about all the markets they play in. So yes, it might look like it's a low penetration rate here, but some of these manufacturers are really being quiet about what vehicles they want to bring out, so it sort of dilutes some of the numbers. And you think, okay, what slide you got next? No big deal. Hey, here's Honda. So Japanese manufacturers are going, wait a second, right? We're going to hold off on BEVs for a little bit. Fuel cells are our ultimate holy grail, and we're going to get a little bit of everything, but we're going to have a higher full hybrid penetration rate because we believe this idea of having a dual power source is really important. So not everyone is playing by the same rule book. In North America in 2019, there were 7 BEVs only, right? 118 in 2029, all compete for that same consumer. 3 brands, Chevy, Nissan, and Tesla, 19. 41 brands doing 5.5 million BEVs in 2029. Again, all fighting for that same consumer. Not everyone can win. Let's talk about the ones on the high end, the ones that are over 100,000 units per year. Tesla, GM, Ford, Honda, right? So these are the manufacturers in North America. By 29 are doing over 100,000. This chart changes every month. We had one time a Tesla in 3rd place because of all the investment strategies of the other players. So it constantly is changing. The takeaways here are, look at Honda. Honda doesn't get into it until 25. And in one life cycle, they're 4th place. So the massive acceleration in investment into these new strategies is very difficult for suppliers and logistics players that are used to a very slow industry. It's been hundreds of years of slow in automotive. So these are tough pills to swallow sometimes. You got to look at each customer in a vacuum. But if you look at on the right-hand side of the table, the greens are those that have 0 or near 0 BEV production in 2022 and then ramp up. BMW goes to 40%. Geely goes to 100%, right? Honda 47%, and so on and so on. Big investment in battery electrics. Tons and tons of billions of dollars. On the low end are the ones that are doing under 100. Foxconn, Lucid, VinFast. Some of these names maybe you even heard of, and some are going to be hard to believe they're going to pull it off, but they're all looking at it. Here's the issue, though. In the end, we don't know who the winner's going to be, so we got to cap this somehow. We can't just give everyone growth. These are all the new players are still fighting for that same customer as well. So we're going to cap them all off in that 300,000, 325. But this story is going to change probably in the next year or so about who's actually going to get the momentum to get there. In terms of light vehicle production globally, top 10, China. These charts are the same scale. China's on the left-hand side, number 1, 2 through 10. So without China, we're talking lightweighting, right? EVs are really not an issue. But China is the big machine that's driving the whole electrification of the world. Powertrains by mix. Again, I'm not going to go too far into this. I don't want to run out over too much time here, but we're talking about North America, Europe, and China. As I said, China, we see that flattening, but still 10 million units of pure battery electrics. Europe is off to the races, and sort of North America is sort of 3rd place in their BEV penetration rate going out. Top 10 brand owners. Okay, 19 anchor that just do BEVs. Tesla number 1 at 365,000 in 19. Tesla number 2 in 29 at 2.6 million. In fact, if you look on the right-hand side, no one's doing less than $1 million in the top 10. On the left-hand side, Tesla was the bet at under 500,000. Again, the takeaway are the stars. The stars on the right-hand side are manufacturers that were not in the top 10 10 short years earlier or 2 life cycles. So this jockeying for position, this investment strategy and high volumes, there's constant leadership changes going on. So you got to really pay attention to who you're working with now, but who you should be working with in the future. And rising tide raises all boats. It just so happens that the top 10 in 19 was 71% of total BEV production, and in 29 it's also 70%. So you're talking about still 8 million units of other players out there that are going to need supply and logistics and everything in between. We look at long-term 2040, and you take in all of the rhetoric and announcements and stuff like that. The manufacturer will have you believing that 92% of all vehicles built worldwide are going to be fully battery electric in 2040. Nope. We're looking at 55%, right? Lots and lots of markets here that aren't going to be consuming these things, so we got to really pay attention. 2 strategies, an aggressive one, more of a Detroit 3 Volkswagen strategy, and more of a wait-and-see, methodical approach coming from a lot of the Asian-based manufacturers. In terms of BEV sales, yeah, 35% of vehicles sold in 2029 are forecast to be produced as BEV. However, the mix changes. You can't have all luxury, you can't have all 113,000 crab-walking Hummers. You got to have some affordable vehicles out there. So we're going to see that healthy mix of, let's call them entry level, but again, as we heard from other speakers, entry level could be still a $50,000 vehicle, unfortunately. So we're going to have a different balance of product in here to push this electrification agenda. So a couple more slides here. In 2019, the top 10 platforms, right? MQB, Volkswagen, Toyota, represent 25 million units of production. Let's fast forward to 2029, but let's put electrification in the story. Top 10 are usually don't move much. There's only 2 platforms in here that are fully electrified, the Gen 3 Tesla and the SSP at Volkswagen. All the other platforms have little or none electrification, BEVs, and some electrification. Right? So we're not telling suppliers to, again, run to the hills. There's a healthy balance of internal combustion engine production still out there. We're not saying, don't listen to it, because electrification is here and it's here to stay. But this idea of this healthy mix of products going forward really has to be looked at critically. So my final thoughts here. Let's bring it to a head. Number 1, the changing consumer. Right? Brand loyalty has eroded. And when you have when you don't bleed, Chevy and Ford blood through and through, if you just like what you see, brand loyalty gets diminished. And when brand loyalty goes down, new player entrance validity goes up, right? That's a good thing for all the new players, because whatever looks cool at the time, or it's got the coolest lights in it, or fastest model, or whatever it might be, and that could be an actual winner. Right? You're not talking about 100-year plus strategy of manufacturing. Build-to-order strategy is coming. COVID has taught the manufacturers that consumers are willing to wait for what they want. So you're going to see dealerships shrink. They're not going to go away. You're going to see them offering more concierge service, more handheld experience, but you're going to go in, you're going to buy your vehicle, you're going to pay sticker, you might wait a week and you'll get it. Right? Ford's already telling their dealership, hey, we want to be charging station network, so make $1 million investment in your dealership, and now you're the charger, right? So now it's going to bring people in to actually charge their vehicles. Subscription-based selling. Right? If they can be in your wallet for $9 a month for new lights, $199 for autonomous vehicle driving every month. If you could find a way to be in the consumer's wallet every single month on every 7 years, you could sell less vehicles with more technology. That's great for the manufacturers. That's really bad for suppliers that need the volume to survive. And a socially motivated buyer is really here. The China effect, it's not if, it's when. There's going to be a huge China influence coming to North America in different ways. We're already seeing battery players come in here, things like that. It's coming, the wave's coming. The supply chain issue, evaluate and rethink just-in-time processes, right? We've learned the last couple of years about just-in-time maybe is not the whole solution, or at least how it was structured before. Maybe there's got to be some sort of hybrid model about your product production and your logistics. You're going to see a lot more vertical integration from the manufacturers, buying up the minerals, buying up the battery supply chain, so they're first in line. God forbid we have another issue or pandemic or whatever it might be. Secondary and tertiary resources. Putting all your eggs in one tier's basket could be very detrimental. We're not trying to tell you to, we're not trying to hurt those, but you got to sort of diverse, or you at least got to convince that tier to say, I need you here, here, and here, because Russia invading Ukraine, also my wiring harnesses are hit and I'm in trouble. So we learn lessons we hope we actually articulate going forward. Electrification is a shareholder value. I can't stress that enough, right? How are you going to get shareholder value out of the company through electrification strategy? That's going to be the big. But the problem is, we all know it. These cars are easier to manufacture, therefore less labor, more automation. You're ripping out powertrains, so you're hitting labor and you're hitting volume. Existing players are obviously getting smart now and saying, we got to grow, we can't do it organically, so GM and Honda are joining forces. Ford and Volkswagen, new brands like BrightDrop and Cruise, Mercedes and Rivian working together. And the new players, right? You throw some money at it, you get some SPAC, you get a charismatic leader, you get a cool AutoCAD drawing of your vehicle, and all of a sudden you have a viable product because you ripped out all EPA needs, you ripped out the engine, you ripped out the transmission, you ripped out all your fluid issues, and now you're valid. Right? So we are seeing this happen over and over again. Companies that go public and are already $100 billion day one, obviously the valuation dropped over time, and we all know who we're talking about here, but this idea that people are running into these ideas, hey, this is the new shining object, and these early adopters, that's your target market. So we really say pay attention to your business, evaluate your current portfolio and your plans, evaluate the strategies, and that's what we're here to help do. So I want to thank you for your time. I think I have 5 minutes for questions if anyone has any.
Joe, thanks for your wide-eyed comments. Question for you, though. It seems to me that, and you talked a little bit around it when you talked about Foxconn, that there's an opportunity for a contract manufacturing solution that would be useful in the industry. I'll call it an agnostic skateboard. The ability to create something that can receive multiple different units, flexibility in terms of length and width, flexibility in terms of the motor and the battery pack. Talk a little bit about that notion as to whether or not it gets traction, or do these manufacturers all stay in their own vertical system?
Yeah, great question, thank you. So let's use some examples. When we look at Tesla, Tesla is a technology company. They just so happen to build awesome cars that are rocket ships, right? So when we look at that kind of mix, and we look at a company like a Magna Steyr, and I'm going to get to, obviously, Foxconn in a second, you're talking about contract manufacturing model exists, it works. Right, so this has been a proven concept. Now, Foxconn has their mobility and harmony strategy. And what they want to do is they want to say, I don't know if you looked it up, but Jack Chang, he's got this strategy where for $10,000 you join his club. And when you join his club, you get sort of first right at certain things. He wants to own the software, not just the skateboard, but the software that runs the thing. And say, I'll put whatever hi-hat you want on top of this. And when you move to a strategy where you have a battery, and you can have a supplier, a manufacturer, corner the market and get the source of the battery, and then putting anything on top, I think contract manufacturing is definitely something on the horizon going forward, 100%. So thank you for letting me expand on that. But yeah, pay attention. Brand new players doing that, high probability you're going to see a lot more contract manufacturers.
Good morning. Thanks for your presentation, Carlos Suarez from Seaberger Integration. You spoke about the China effect there. Can you expand a little more about what you mean by that in the macro level? Yeah, so right now, geopolitically, if anyone, I don't think a Chinese manufacturer is going to walk in and say, hey, we got something, there's too much tension. But where you're going to see a Chinese manufacturer come in is they're going to say, look, I know how to do minerals and batteries, so I'm going to set up shop in North America, and I'm going to support the supply chain from that. I think Goshen's a good example of a Chinese manufacturer here that's looking to say, we want to plant a flag here and use that as an opportunity to be a sourcing strategy. Now, the long-term China effect is, usually in a market, you sell 50,000 vehicles in that market, and then you justify putting a plant in that market because it doesn't make sense to import all the time, right? So we see that the model of an importer strategy, probably from a California side, is going to be the big push. When China comes, though, it's going to have to be a very high-value electric vehicle, because the biggest risk China has is that it's, for lack of a better term, a piece of crap, right? And they go, see, it's built in China, and it's going to set them back it's going to set them back 5 years. So the China strategy to me is an import strategy of a very high-end, maybe high warranty, maybe free charging, whatever they're going to do. They're going to try to up the game
coming through a California side, but also setting shop from a supply chain side and moving their way out for partnerships. I hope that helped.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. It was tremendous in content density.
Yeah.
I'm interested in other areas around disruptive activity. Yesterday we saw the presentation in Phoenix about use of autonomous vehicles. So you mentioned today the different consumer. I've got a great interest in buying ICE vehicles, but my daughter has no interest in buying a vehicle at all. So what about that space of autonomous vehicles, and how do you see that emerging in our future?
So are you talking about the fact that not even want to buy a vehicle?
Yeah, my daughter does not want to drive a vehicle. She wants to hit the app, have the car arrive, door open, and go to where she
I mean, when we were all growing up, a car was freedom, right? That was your way out, and and you couldn't wait to get a license. I have two daughters the same way. They could care less about getting a license, and the whole gig economy also put that on its ear, because you're right, I can do the Uber. I think you're going to see more people that, I got to think that's got to come back a little bit, because the freedom of movement, the ability to move your stuff from point A to point B, right now it's convenient because it's right there, but all I think a consumer needs is that 1, 2, or 3 times going, boy, I wish I had a car right this second. And I think it's going to get it. Now, I do agree with you. That's going to be a really good precursor towards lower production volume, because it's going to lower sales. I wholeheartedly believe it. I don't think it's going to put the manufacturer completely on its ear, because I think that consumer is a smaller right to second. But then you layer in the people that are in the cities that say, look, I never wanted a car, but hey, maybe I want to do maybe I want to share a car. Maybe I want to have it where we share the lease, or it's different manufacturers. We're sort of saying, hey, you can rent this car for 2 hours. It's parked down the street. So you actually might have a healthy balance of people that want to get out, but those that never owned a car to sort of get back in. And when they get back into that share, that vehicle is going to get a lot of miles in a very short amount of time, and they're going to have more replacement value. So I think we're going to have a balancing act. The consumer issue is definitely shifting. I don't think it's going to be so disruptive that we have a completely different landscape in 5 or 10 years.
Good morning, real quick. So great presentation, Joe, from your side. Really appreciate it. You talked a lot about battery electric vehicles on the car side. If you look now at transportation services like trucks, etc., there's this debate about, what can battery electric trucks really do in terms of range. Mm-hmm. Do you have a perspective on hydrogen in the world, and specifically in trucking also?
So when we talk about electrification, we believe commercial vehicles are a fantastic tool in improving the optics of the consumer. So let's start with smaller trucks and get bigger, right? So if you could see your little Amazon Smile trucks zipping around and they're electrified, and everyone gets deliveries almost every day, I know we do, you're going to start getting an optics issue of hey, this EV thing is a real deal, maybe I want to consider it. So it's really helping it. Plus, a lot of those vehicles don't need really sexy interiors and all that. They're just big boxes on a battery with 4 wheels. So their manufacturing capability is a lot easier. So we think commercial vehicles are going to really help. Now, as we get larger and larger, we are really leaning towards fuel cell. If you get Class 8 trucks, things like that, one of the biggest problems is there's a limited lithium out there, and when you take a battery electric vehicle and you got a battery this big, or a high fuel cell where you can make the battery this big and store the energy in the tanks, not in the battery, that's going to sort of help the whole equation. It'll also reduce the weight of these trucks. I mean, when you're talking about some of these trucks and the weight that you got to put on it just for the battery for the 100-mile range, it's a difficult task. So I think there's going to be some combination in the future of electrification, but we are really leaning towards fuel cells and hydrogen as the big Class 6 and up strategy.
You mentioned this a little bit, but how much do you see the infrastructure being a curb on growth in terms of EV adoption? And then do you see a big rural-urban divide in this?
Huge. I mean, I have some arguments with people about infrastructure. I think our infrastructure is number one, honestly, in terms of hurdles, because people have convenience right now with gas stations. You drive by a lot of places, not every charging station's taken over. There's been studies that I don't know what the number is, maybe 1/3 to 2/3 of charging stations don't even work when you get there. So we got a real big problem with infrastructure. And as your volume of vehicles go up and more people say there's a problem, it's a problem, it's a problem, it's really going to hammer, it's going to give us more of a valley in it. So to me, look, range is there. We're finding a way to get material, right? The costs are respectable, let's call them. They're coming down and they're sort of collapsing into more of a IC range. But to me, infrastructure is sort of this one that sits out here, that without huge government investment and people that want to be in this space investing in it. I mean, I'm shocked that Tesla doesn't have an agreement with all the local utilities and say, look, I'm going to charge $2,000 more, and we already set up the electrician to come in and put in your 240 line. Like, those little conversations are really, I can't believe they're not having them yet, but to me, infrastructure is truly the #1 problem.
Quick question related to your remark about the Class 6, Class 8 type of trucks. You talk about hydrogen fuel cells. I know in Europe there's more focus on hydrogen internal combustion engines because the fuel cell cost is still significant for those trucks, and they don't see that come down. What's your perspective for the US on internal combustion engines, heavy duty, on hydrogen?
I feel US is going to be last, honestly. I think there's going to be other adopters that have accepted it. I mean, look, there's a real optics issue that you're driving around on a Hindenburg. It's not true, but people, they panic when they see I got a hydrogen tank, and if the cooling doesn't happen or the compression goes off, boom. We know that's not going to happen, but the optics issue is a big one. I look at hydrogen as more of a hydrogen. Vehicles are just another electric vehicle. Once you convince a consumer to get out of ICs into EVs, all you're doing is changing how you're getting energy to the batteries, right? Instead of a pump and it's a liquid, or it might be a liquid, hydrogen at that point, but you're changing the methodology. So there's no prize to us of getting hydrogen so impacted now, because you want to get everyone moved to EV strategies first, and then you move them, right? I look at it as, CDs existed when tapes were out, but don't push the CDs too much because we want to exhaust all the tape buyers, right? And MP3s were around, but don't push it too much because we want to exhaust all the CD players. So I think that, to me, hydrogen is the long game. I just don't think there's any right this second prize, at least on a light side, because I think it will confuse a consumer going, geez, I don't know what to choose now. Let me wait till this thing becomes more mature. Obviously, trucking is a lot different, but I think from a light side or off Class 4 and below, it's going to be a tricky one, especially in the States.
Just like to take the opportunity to relate to the last question again on a hydrogen. So I know it's a lot about supply chain and a lot about trucking here. If there's people in the audience who have an interest to learn more about this one, we have next Wednesday in Washington a hydrogen and trucking conference coming up.
All right.
And if there's any interest, just see me here at the conference. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other commercials? Anyone else? All right, perfect. Well, thank you, everybody.